Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Rod Collins, an author, leading expert on self managed organizations and the transformational power of collective intelligence. And he's also a former COO, Chief Operating Executive of the Blue Cross Blue Shield Federal Employee Program. Welcome to the show, Rod.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here with you.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show, Rod. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. Will understand from you about self-managed teams and collective intelligence. All this we'll learn from you. But first, Rod, let's understand a bit more about your background, about your journey, so that the audience knows who they are listening to.
Sure. As you mentioned, I spent over 3 decades with the Blue Cross Blue Shield Federal Employee Program in the United States. And that business is a business alliance of 39 independent companies delivering a seamless product. In midway through my career, I had completed maybe about 15 years as the general auditor for the program. And one day my boss called me in and said, you make a lot of recommendations that people don't implement. We had sustained 2 decades of low growth, low performance. We're going to put you over the operations and we need you to turn it around and turn it around quickly. And as I thought about it, I had a light bulb went off. We lead this business alliance like it's a hierarchy, and we lead it like we're in charge. But we're really not a hierarchy, we're a network. And I realized there's really no literature on how to lead a network. And so if we were going to succeed, we would have to learn how to do this and do a bit of trailblazing. And trailblazing we did do indeed. We turned the business around in the first 2 years, we had regained as much of our lost enrollment as we had over the previous 2 decades. And then we took off like a rocket ship. And after about 4 years in this role, I was then elevated to be the chief executive of the business. And I served in that role for 5 years before I chose retirement. And during that 5 years, we have what remains to this day the single largest 5-year growth period in the history of the business. And it all had to do with using a very different alternative management model, which is the peer-to-peer network. Most of us spend our times in all forms of social organization in top-down hierarchies. Most of us can't conceive of how would an organization work if there weren't any bosses. Now, in the situation I was in, the hierarchy remained, but what I was able to do, especially when I was the chief executive for the large business unit, is I could put in place aspects of the peer-to-peer network model, and that led to better decision-making and led to the extraordinary performance we had. I took retirement in 2007, and I was puzzled by why did what we do work so well? Again, we were trailblazers. We learned by practice, trial and error. And I spent a year researching different forms of organization. And I discovered that there were companies that were operating successfully for decades that didn't have any bosses. They were pure peer-to-peer networks and really had developed this alternative model. And the other thing I discovered is I read a book called The Wisdom of Crowds by James Surowiecki. And he indicated that what crowds do well, and crowds are very different. Wisdom of crowds is very different from the mob. This isn't mob thinking. And he identified 4 critical factors you have to have in order to tap into the collective wisdom or the collective intelligence of a group. And those 4 are, you need to have diversity of opinion. You need independent thinking. People need to be free to express whatever they think, no matter what it is. You need people who have local knowledge. They're close to processes. And you need an aggregation mechanism. And when I saw that, I realized why our business model had worked. Because one of the things we did to lead the network like I told you, we had 39 separate companies. Anytime we had a major project or a major system change or a major strategic activity we needed to do, we would bring in about 50 people from these 39 organizations for 2 or 3 days in a hotel and conduct what I now call a collective intelligence workshop. And out of these would come tremendous innovative thinking that all the people in the room agreed to, and it translated out to the larger organization. So all this fighting back and forth about you're not in charge of us went away because we were able to collate their collective intelligence. And people's reaction to what came out of these workshops was, oh, that's very well thought out. And I realized we had all four elements in our collective intelligence workshop. We allowed diversity of opinion. We allowed independent thinking. There was no censorship, no unspeakables. We had we mixed high level people and people close to processes in the same meeting with the same voice. And these were highly facilitated. And I think a lot of people, especially those who work in companies, will be familiar with this. Our aggregation mechanism was dot voting. And then I realized why what we did worked. And I've written several books. The most recent one really captures the spirit of the peer-to-peer network and collective intelligence. And its title is Nobody is Smarter Than Everybody. And that's not a slogan, it's the truth. The highest form of our human intelligence is collective intelligence, and top-down hierarchies can't tap into it, and in many instances, kill it. And that's why smart people make senseless errors.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Rod. So let's understand this better.
Yes.
If we talk about, say, collective intelligence, uh, in organizations, isn't it collective intelligence? You have got the so many brilliant people. You have got the CEO. You have got the chief marketing officer. You have got the chief human resources officer. All these people, they are there, they have their own teams. Every team has its own expertise. They together, whenever there is a project problem, they together use all their intelligence, collect it together, bring it to the CEO. Again they brainstorm. There is also the board of directors, and all these people together, from the management level, they, with all their collective intelligence, they take decisions which fail. Many a times it fails. But what is wrong with this collective intelligence, and what is so right with your type of collective intelligence? And what has happened is that you see another type of collective intelligence, again, if you look at, is again is the chat GPT. That is also another form of collective intelligence which people are resorting to. So help us understand in that backdrop, Rod.
Sure, that's a great question. And it helps us get into the difference between collective intelligence and groupthink. So let's take what you described. And this is very similar to, I'm sure, the experience of most of our listeners in organizations. Leadership teams always present themselves as highly collaborative. And most people realize they're the most dysfunctional team in a typical organization. Why? They're all competing to be the next CEO. They're withholding information because I don't want somebody else to look good because they may be the next CEO rather than I do. Our listeners have been involved in conversations where they know that their area is withholding information from other areas. So it winds up that it is wishful thinking at best and just mere talk at worst. Now, when you have a peer-to-peer network structure and you don't have bosses, well, there's no CEO position that people are striving for. When an organization is designed to leverage collective intelligence, the only way things get done is that people have to work together on a continuous basis. Now, when we put this model in place in the Blue Cross Blue Shield Federal Employee Program, when I became the chief executive, our leadership team did not have a strategic meeting once a year, as is typically done. We had a strategy session once every 2 weeks, and we did it off site. And we had a norm within our group that no one in that leadership team could make a unilateral decision in their function until they ran it by the entire team, because business problems are complex. And oftentimes, as we did this, as somebody would be explaining, well, this is what we're thinking of doing, and this is why we're doing it, somebody would react and say, oh my goodness, you can't do that, because if you do that, it's going to have this effect. And the person originally proposing would say, I didn't know that. Okay. And somebody else may pop up and say, well, this affects me in this way. Now, this conversation is collegial. And what we're doing is, now that we are truly tapping into our collective intelligence, we as a group come up with a solution that, one, meets the complexity of the problem, and two, that integrates the best thinking of everyone before we've done anything. And that stops the backbiting. Because when people have made a unilateral decision and put it in place, and somebody says, well, that doesn't work for me, that oftentimes starts a tussle rather than an opportunity to integrate information. And if I could give one example that I think
Yes.
our listeners will appreciate, because this is really, really hard to understand how an organization without bosses could operate. And I want to go to an industry that has been using the network model for 40 years, highly effectively, and did it because they realized leveraging the elite intelligence of the boss was literally leading to deaths. And that place is the cockpit. Why don't we have airplane crashes anymore? All right. I mean, when I was, 50 years ago, when I first started working, in the United States, we had 3 to 4 airplane crashes per year. I can remember many times the television show being interjected. We have a breaking story and they're covering these crashes. We don't have that anymore. Why? Well, something happened in 1978. United Flight 173 ran out of fuel because the crew was myopically focused on a problem. I should say the captain was myopically focused on a problem of whether the right landing gear was locked or not. And he dismissed the gentle inquiries from his 2 crewmates because they were operating by the top-down command and control model, and you do not challenge the captain. And so when the NTSB team, that's the National Transportation Safety Board in the United States, before they began their work, they said, how is it that 3 veteran pilots can make such a senseless error as running out of fuel? And when they listened to the tapes, they realized why. It's the command and control model. It's killing people. And it's what we resort to in emergencies. It's the wrong thing to do. And so their recommendation that they made, that United implemented, and immediately every airline in the entire world is implemented, they call it crew resource management. So in a crisis, everybody can speak up. The captain cannot shut people down. And if the second or third person in the crew realizes we got a problem here, there are circumstances in which they can exert themselves. And so that no plane has ever run out of fuel since that time. And they use this peer-to-peer network model. There was a crash here in the United States about 10 years after this was put in place. It happened in Sioux City, Iowa. The plane had lost all its hydraulics. It had no ability to manipulate many of the parts. And the 3 crew members brought a captain who was sitting in the passengers. They found he was there. Bring him up here. Let's expand the team. And they were able to crash land that plane and save the lives of 2/3 of the people in a plane that, if they had used command and control management, everyone would have been gone. And how do we know? Because when they interviewed the captain afterwards and say, how is it that you saved 2/3 of the people on a plane that you couldn't manipulate the hydraulics at all? And without missing a beat, he said, crew resource management. If we had not used crew resource management, which is their word for peer-to-peer network, we would have never been able to do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Rod. But you see, it's about saving lives.
Yeah.
Here, a lot of leaders, they want to save their position and they want to be the smartest person in wherever they are. And the smartest person says, listen, I don't to me need too many cooks. Too many cooks spoil the broth. Don't talk to me about resource management. I am the boss. I am the smartest person. And if I need advice, I will get that advice. But my name, I will take that credit. If I need, I will get external consultants. If I need, I will get more people from outside. But then they will not take the credit. It will all go to me. And I can go to the board of directors and tell them what a smart person I am. You see? And so that is why you raise my salary, you give me more bonus, and that's the way it is. Problem is it about the team, Rod, or is it about the individuals who are leading such teams or organizations?
This is a great question. So let me address it with two different aspects. The first aspect is knowledge. Okay, the people at the top of organizations, they've been promoted. They're promoted because they're intelligent and they believe, as you articulated, they're the smartest person in the room. Okay, top-down hierarchical organizations are good at two of the four types of knowledge. The first type of knowledge is what I know, I know. Okay, and so I have expertise, I know that. The second type of knowledge that organizations are good at is what I know, I don't know. And when in that situation, I bring in the smart consultant. All right, that's all top-down hierarchies are good at. There are two other types of knowledge that top-down hierarchies and elite leaders don't get to. Number one, what I don't know that I know. And the other box is what I don't know that I don't know. And this type of knowledge is what presented itself in our collective intelligence workshops. Because when you get different levels, all these different smart people, not just at the top of organization, but there's a lot of smart people who are close to customers and close to processes. And when you can integrate the high level knowledge with the day-to-day knowledge, you're all of a sudden you hear somebody say, I didn't know that. You're running into that. You're discovering what you didn't know, you know, because somebody in that organization has that knowledge. But what was really powerful, there were moments in these workshops where we were all of us at the sudden discovering what we didn't know before we started the project. One of the benefits of using this network approach is everything we did across a 10-year period was on time, on budget, high quality, no cost overruns. Why? Because we were discovering what we didn't know before we started the work by leveraging the collective intelligence of the group. All right. Top-down hierarchies don't get to see that until projects are well underway. And the remedies that they can do are minimal, not maximal. And this is when you can tap into those other aspects of knowledge, which networks can do. The second issue is when you have bosses and you leverage their individual intelligence, sure, they're very smart in certain areas, but in other areas, they have blind spots. And there were two Israeli psychologists, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. And Kahneman won a Nobel Prize, believe it or not, in economics for this work, even though he was a psychologist, because the two of them, Tversky would have won it as well, but the award is only given to people who are living. And Tversky, unfortunately, died about 25 years ago. But Kahneman just passed away in 2024. But anyway, what they showed is human beings engage in two levels of thinking. They call them system one, system two. System one is fast thinking. System two is slow thinking. And humans need both these capacities. But the problem with fast thinking is it's based on a lot of biases that we're unconscious about. We're actually blind to them. And when you set up a top-down hierarchy and allow people at the top to dismiss the voices of others, and this is the problem with censorship. Oftentimes we're shutting down the voices of people who are seeing things that need to be seen. Then you amplify these biases and the organization runs into trouble. So let me just conclude with I like to give pictures. So let's give an example of a company that was very successful. It was the market leader, the dominant leader by a lot. It had a highly intelligent CEO. That company was Blockbuster, which was the largest rental video store in the United States for a good decade, just number one, just dominant. All right. One day, the CEO had a meeting with two startup founders who were $50 million in debt, and they offered to sell themselves to Blockbuster if they could build a blockbuster.com streaming capacity. This one person by himself decided nobody's ever going to get into streaming. We're not going to do that. The answer is no. The two people sitting down with him who wanted to sell their business were the co-founders of Netflix. Blockbuster should be the largest name in streaming today. That one person passed up a 50-fold growth opportunity because he thought he was the smartest person in the room. If Blockbuster had a peer-to-peer network model and the CEO was just a member of a leadership team and accepted the discipline, we're going to let this team make the decisions. Oh, sure, he wouldn't have made the decision in 45 minutes, but within a week's time, which is certainly fast enough time, some people in that team may have said, that's the future of where we're going. That CEO would have had the opportunity to learn. There is no good reason why Blockbuster should not be what Netflix is today. That is the danger of the smartest person in the room. Kodak is another example. We don't have to go through the details. And I'm sure listeners can think about companies that were once household names that don't exist anymore. And that's the great danger of the top-down hierarchy. Your success is likely to last only as long as the life of your best product. And that best product's lifespan is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Peer-to-peer networks innovate better than top-down hierarchies because peer-to-peer networks don't shut down heretics, and every innovative idea starts as a heresy.
Right, Rod. What about accountability? Today's age is about accountability. If there are so many people managing affairs, who takes the cake? Who takes the brickbats?
The accountability actually goes up and improves. And let me explain why. In the typical hierarchical organization, I am accountable to a boss. That boss controls my future in this company. So my job is to keep that one person happy. And if I do, I succeed. But keeping that boss happy is not necessarily in the best interest of the company. May not be the best way to solve complex problems. In a peer-to-peer network, and I'll give an example, W.L. Gore is the maker of Gore-Tex. They invented Gore-Tex. They're a global company around the world. They've been using self-management since 1958, the first company to do it. An 11,000 person company in 30 countries around the world, made a profit every year of their existence. The model works. What they do, they have a very simple evaluation process. People tend to work with about 20 people on a routine basis. So every year you have to rank the 20 people you work with, 1 to 20, no ties, in terms of their contribution to the company, not how they please you, how they're contributing to the company. And everybody winds up getting evaluated by 20 people, and these get aggregated. Remember, collective intelligence, local knowledge, diversity of opinion, independent thinking, and an aggregation mechanism. Gore has it in its before. And you don't go through all this detail that may be relevant on the first day of the year and completely irrelevant on the last day of the year. They're asking who's contributing to the company and rank them accordingly. And that's how they do their performance appraisal. Now, what does that mean? I just can't keep one person happy. I have to keep 20 people happy. What's the value of that? Well, I'm more likely to discover what I don't know that I don't know because I have to listen to these people in ways I didn't before. We also may discover what we don't know that we know in the conversations that we have. And this is, I think, what has led to their incredible profit record over all of those years. No, accountability improves. It goes up. Because the worst thing you can do in a company is just have your fate in the hands of a single supervisor.
Right. So big should these teams be? Can it be? Let's come to your book.
Yeah.
Nobody is smarter than everybody. How do we know that everybody is intelligent enough? They can be, in these times of democracy and everything, they can also be people with low intellect, or could be also stupid. Some of them could be stupid. The smart person in the room will look stupid if he speaks to those stupid people. How do we ensure that it's not a mob, but a group of very intelligent people?
Okay. Another great question. You're going to have various levels of intelligence with any team. Okay. And if you're in a specific function, some are going to be more intelligent relative to that function than not. All right. Now, one of the beauties of the wisdom of the crowds, and I saw this in the collective intelligence workshops I talked about, we would invite people into the workshop who we thought had wrong ideas. And we welcomed them in for two reasons. Number one, if we're going to drive a broad-based consensus, we have to honor all the voices, whether we agree with them or not. But the thing we discovered, even people that we may perceive as supposedly less intelligent, oftentimes they may see something that nobody else does that winds up being incredibly valuable. And that was one of the things that Surowiecki found in his study of the wisdom of crowds is even eccentric people can make contributions. Not everything they say is valuable, but sometimes they have a kernel that makes the whole thing work. And the analogy I use is if you're making a tomato sauce, you'll never make it without garlic, but you don't want a pure garlic sauce. All right. You need a little bit of garlic in every sauce.
Well explained, Rod. Well explained. There is much to learn from you. This book of yours, nobody is smarter than everybody. Who is this book for?
This book, it's primarily for leaders of organizations, especially those who want to design their organization to solve complex problems. See, one of the changes between the 20th century and the 21st century, in the 20th century, our problems were complicated. Complicated problems are mechanical, which means I can take things apart and I can have different people work on the different parts. And just like a car, I can put them together. What has happened with the digital age, what has happened with this transformation we're going through, all problems are complex. And so you can't separate the parts. They need to be integrated, and the solution process must be an integrated one. That's what we did in these collective intelligence workshops. We had 20 years of low growth, low performance because we were working in the independent parts and they were fighting each other. But when we would start a project by bringing 50 representative people, all levels, all disciplines, some disciplines not even involved in the project, okay? We were, like I say, with complex problems, you want to discover what you don't know, and what you don't know that you do know. Those two other aspects of knowledge becomes critical to solve complex problems. And so it's intended for leaders like that. It's also, I think, I'm seeing it more as being something that is valuable for everyone, because the biggest challenge that we're going to have as we build artificial intelligence is which one of these forms of social organization will we use? If we design AI as a top-down hierarchical model, we're going to look at the most draconian forms of totalitarianism the world has ever seen. China is showing us this with its social credit scores. We don't want to live in that world where the government sees everything. The alternative is a peer-to-peer network, and Bitcoin Bitcoin and blockchain are the first models of what that would look like in a digital space. If we use the peer-to-peer network model, we are likely to evolve humanity to a higher level of intelligence than we've ever known. And that fork in the road is going to be the most important decision we make. I think going forward, the only model that should be used among all forms of social organization is the self-managed peer-to-peer network. We have a lot to learn, because Joshua Cooper Ramos, who wrote this book called The Seventh Sense, and the seventh sense is the sense people have who understand networks and how they work. He said we have a challenge because we're at a very primitive point in our understanding of networks. But if we learn, then we'll have the same experience that the pilots have had in the cockpit. We will have fewer deaths and fewer fatal crashes because we've learned how to work as a network rather than as a top-down hierarchy.
Right, Rod. One last question that comes to my mind is about
Sure.
in today's time, has changed, and a lot of these companies that are coming up are startups, and
Yes.
they are dependent on vision, leadership, smart thinking, less thinking, big thinking, but whatever thinking it is, on one individual, two co-founders, on all that stuff.
Hmm.
And on that basis, they scale up, they get funding, and they continue. And many a times, many of these startups fail, but many of them become big companies.
Yes.
How is it that, and several people may have the same idea, but some get funding because they believe that these founders have that zeal, that vision, and that smartness to take this idea forward, and they continue to be there. uh, how is it that they can, using still their own vision and smartness and the whole vision for the organization or product or pain that they are trying to solve, they still get the power of the peer-to-peer network, that collective intelligence within their system, uh, which is, slightly different for or difficult for them, the way they are doing things.
Another great question. Every startup has the same organizational model, the dysfunctional family, and it works. Most of us were raised in dysfunctional families, and we love our families, and we're better people because of it. If we didn't have any challenges, we wouldn't develop the skills we have. Well, there's a lot of dysfunctionality that goes on, but one thing about startups, they're small teams, everybody is in each other's presence. So the serendipity and the emergence that happens in networks happens naturally. And the dysfunctional family is a form of a network. Now, when a company grows and is successful, it will eventually hit this fork in the road. It's going to have to formally organize. And I would urge the founders, the co-founders of these startups, don't design a top-down hierarchy. You're likely to have the blockbuster experience if you do that. Netflix has kept aspects of the peer-to-peer network, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be the general direction, and people can create their own flavors. But there are two critical numbers as you get large. One is 10 to 12. That should be the size of a team. It's got enough diversity, and there should be no boss. No one should be in charge of the 10 to 12 team. And you'll have to design procedures and processes for how you work out irreconcilable differences. And we talk about that in the book. The other important number is 150. That's the maximum number of people within a business unit where we can know whether people like us or dislike us. And you see why hierarchies come up, because once you go above that number, this was something that Bill Gore discovered when he was a startup. It started in his basement, literally. When he had 150 people, the self-management began to break down. And he said, I don't want a hierarchy. So what did he do? He said, I'll divide the company in half. And they were about 200. And I'll make them autonomous units. So at Gore, you really have a campus, and each of these are different units of 150 people each, organized in teams of 10 to 12. People can move across these organizations because there's nobody assigning to work. You have to find work, and if projects finish, you go and do that. But it's highly innovative. And also, you keep the startup mindset, because a group of people could get together and say, we're going to design something different. And if it threatens your current product, rejoice, because it means you will replace yourself, not some other startup, as happened to Blockbuster. And this is hierarchies never want to kill their main product, but a network realizes my main product will not be eternal. And if anybody's going to replace me, I want it to be me. And so the network will keep that startup thinking going, because a team of 10 to 12 can go off. Now, the accountability is they're going to have to deliver, because if they don't, they won't get compensated. And you want to drive that what I would call positive risk within an organization.
Wonderful. There's much to learn from you, Rod, about all these things, about self-managed teams, about collective intelligence, and also to learn from your book, Nobody is Smarter Than Everybody. So a lot of people who would want to connect with you, want to learn from you, learn from your book, what is the best way for them to do so?
Well, I have a website, and that website is rodcollins.net. And I also do a Substack, and that Substack, if you just Google Substack Rod Collins, I call it Thinking Differently, because I think that's what we have to do in this 21st century, is learn to think differently.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.